Dragon Warrior is a game for the Nintendo Entertainment System released in 1989. Now, those in the know are already yelling at me to tell the real story. Dragon Warrior is actually the North American release of the very first Dragon Quest from Japan, which was released 3 whole years prior in 1986. They had to change the name to avoid copyright infringement with an already existing tabletop game of the same name, a pretty common occurrence back then. For the purpose of this review, I'll be referring to it as Dragon Warrior. Sorry, purists. Before you begin your journey, the instruction manual tells a tale of the legendary hero named Erdrick, who traveled to defeat the Dragon Lord. Before disappearing, this hero left a ball of light with the King of Tantagel that drove away monsters from the land of Alefgard. You begin the game generations later as the descendant of Erdrick, speaking with the King of Tantagel, who informs you that the Dragon Lord has returned, having attacked Tantagel, stolen the Ball of Light, and kidnapped the Princess Gwaelin. Without the Ball of Light, monsters have begun to cause terror in Alefgard once again. You are tasked with rescuing the princess and retrieving the Ball of Light, but to do so, you'll have to travel the land to build your strength and find a way to access the Dragon Lord's castle, which is literally right across a massive river from where you begin. Talk about badass. The main bad guy has perched himself within eyesight just to keep mocking you. Like many RPGs, Dragon Warrior uses command menus to give access to a wide variety of actions. As you walk around towns and the world map, you press A to open a command menu that has the options Talk, Spell, Status, Item, Stairs, Door, Search, and Take. In the mid-80s, this was actually pretty streamlined compared to other console RPGs, but it really did kill some flow when you had to choose commands to use stairs or a door. Treasure chests were not too common, so having the take command all the way at the bottom wasn't a big deal, especially since you're about to get something for free. Now, if only there was a command to shove NPCs out of the way. You're literally going back and forth, buddy. Go get a job! In addition to having to open a command menu to do anything, the movement also felt a bit clunky. It was almost like nothing moved until certain beats were hit every few milliseconds. This was probably a hardware limitation to allow information to process, but it was really noticeable and you don't really totally get used to it. When you make your way out to the world map, you'll randomly encounter monsters in turn-based combat, where your only options are fight, spell, run, and item. In your first few battles, fight is your only option to attack, but as you defeat enemies and level up, you'll gain access to spells that can harm or heal. As you get stronger, some battles just turn into a grind, but turns out holding the A button actually still activates the commands. You don't have to keep tapping the button, so you can fly through some of the more tedious battles, which is good because you're going to be doing that quite often. When traveling further away from Tantagel, monsters will get stronger, and if you're not careful, you can hit a pretty huge difficulty spike. A great time to use the run command, but even your attempt to flee can be blocked. The game does promote bravery at times though, as the only penalty for death is half your gold. Other than that, you get to keep your gear and experience points. You do, however, get transported all the way back to Tantagel in front of the king, who, as far as I can tell, was the only way to save the game. That was fine and all for early gameplay, but if the story takes you further away, that's a big time suck, having to travel all the way back to save the game, and then travel all the way back to where you wish to continue your progress. I only managed to hit one dungeon in the first hour, but the one that I did must have been more story-driven than anything, because there was no monsters in it. Which is a good thing because it actually played more like a puzzle, with the end reward being a tablet from the late Erdrick explaining what you, his descendant, must do to save the world. I was actually impressed with this cave. It was so dark you needed a torch to be able to see at least a square around you. And if you were able to see the whole dungeon, then its layout likely would have been super simplistic. But since you can only see in a 3x3 radius, it actually made for a decent maze puzzle. It was short and sweet, but with just enough early game pathfinding challenge. The gameplay of Dragon Warrior gets a 7 out of 10. When it comes to the non-battle artwork, Dragon Warrior isn't really going to wow you. A lot of the character sprites and environment tiles just worked on a basic level, which was pretty great for back then. A lot of similar games were just text-based or interpretive drawings. There's still some wrinkles though, with the treasure chest being a very similar color as the ground they were on, as well as towns and cave tiles on the overworld being very obviously square and not taking advantage of any alpha channels. An interesting difference between Dragon Warrior and Dragon Quest is that the character sprites for Quest were all a lot more basic, looking more like classic PC RPG sprites that always looked forward with little movement. The developers at Enix took the 3 years before Dragon Warrior to improve the sprites to a more cartoony design that also had all 4 direction angles available. Transitions into the battle scene were quick and charming. There was a bit more character to the fight revealing itself through a small animation rather than the whole screen wipe. It allowed you to still see the walking map behind the action, in addition to the matching backgrounds in the battle scenes. A really nice visual touch to make the fights feel grounded in their environments. And the monster designs, of course, are attributed to Mr. Dragon Ball himself, Akira Toriyama. Enix figured hiring him would go a long way to getting some attention from the Japanese market, and boy did it ever. Even something as simple as the Dragon Quest slime worked so well to make easy merchandise outside of the game. His designs have been a staple of the series, and like his other works, have endured the test of time. The graphics get a 7 out of 10. The first tune you listen to while speaking to the King of Tantagel sets the tone of a dire scenario that still has some hope left in it. Once you leave the throne room though, a similar tune starts to play, but never does hit the brighter side. It's clearly not all smiles inside this castle. Venturing outside gives you a tune of wonder and adventure, while the town theme is a much brighter spot, but with the residents still going about their daily lives. The battle theme, while simplistic, hits the notes that tell you not to panic, but don't lose your focus. As much as all these tunes work, they do eventually get a bit repetitive. With the slow grind of the game, they don't really appeal enough to be considered classic. Really, the only enduring tune is the title theme of the series, as this feels like it has a little more character and nuance to it. The sound effects work quite well. The more general sounds are generic enough and aren't a pain to listen to, but the sounds for battle had some nice charm to them. They didn't sound like your typical hack, slash, and magic sounds, and really, there's a reason why these exact sounds reappear in future Dragon Quests, despite those games having better hardware to work with. The music and sound of Dragon Warrior gets a 7 out of 10. My mom had a friend whose son owned this game. When we would visit, I was allowed to entertain myself with their Nintendo, as the son was in his late teens, just out doing teen things whenever we visited, so the console was free for use. I wasn't much of an RPG player back then, but it being the only thing to keep me occupied let me actually dig into it enough for it to leave enough of a lasting impression. The bright colors and the gameplay loop had me hooked enough to enjoy it, but not enough for me to ask to buy it. The nostalgia hit gets a 5 out of 10. Dragon Quest in Japan was a major step forward in console RPGs, while Dragon Warrior in North America was one of the region's first encounters with JRPGs. While it didn't come out of the gate strong, we can see just how much of a lasting impact it actually made over time, especially having a few remakes and re-releases over a nearly 40-year span. The pace and look of this game certainly feels dated, but if you have the patience, it would be worth taking a dive into this piece of gaming history. It might just hook you.